Hey everybody, it's Saturday again, and I managed to make a hell of a mess of the Jeep. What I'm doing now is I am consolidating the wiring harness that leads to my rear subwoofers that are built into my rear bench into the wiring harness for my isolator off of my starter battery. So it's always bothered me that my harness for my rear subwoofers, when it got to about this point here, it was just sort of exposed and out in the open because I don't run carpets in the back of my Jeep, only in the front. So right where the carpets stop, the wires came out and they came across the floor and then up into the rear bench seat. It occurred to me, I never talked about my rear subwoofers. I built these a while ago when I was less of a fabricator. What I did was I went to the local auto parts store and I picked up these two 8-inch amped subwoofers. And they're just shallow enough that I was able to build them into the bottom of my bench seat and mount them on angle brackets in here. Picked these up from the local hardware store. I did this probably, I don't know, maybe eight or 9 years ago at this point, I think. But it's held up. I've been meaning to rebuild it now that I'm a little bit better with this kind of stuff. I will probably do that within the next, I don't know, maybe a year or so. But so as I was saying, that wiring harness comes out from underneath the carpet right behind the center console, and it ties into this. And it's always bothered me that this has been sort of sitting on the floor and just sort of sliding around whenever I take a hard turn, or you can kind of hear it banging around when I'm off-roading. So what I've decided to do is reroute that rear wiring harness across my firewall, and now I punched a hole through to the engine compartment here. So this is that same harness. This is the harness that used to run across my floor, and now it comes out through this rubber grommet behind the battery, behind the starter battery, and it ties into the wiring harness for the isolator. So now all of the batteries that are running to, all of the wires that are running to the rear of the Jeep are consolidated into one long harness here. So it's been a busy week, and I didn't really get a chance to really do anything or even think about this project. But in the background, some parts came in, so I've been collecting stuff all week. I got this. This is the loom that I'm going to use to run my wiring harness to the back of the Jeep. I got, forget how many feet of that. Of course, made in China. 25 feet, three-quarter inch. And I got these handy little clips, rubberized clips, that now that I have a slightly different game plan, I might not need anywhere near as many as I ordered. I ordered 2 bags of those. So I got 2 of those. I got some more wire, 4 gauge, another 5 feet. That's just sort of to have on hand. I got these straps. These are the straps that are going to hold the batteries down in the tray. And I got these are pretty cool. The box doesn't really do them justice, but these are adapters, power adapters that have built-in voltmeters. So they have a USB, and then they have that new funky type charger input that iPhones use. And you can sort of see in the middle there, you can see 888. When this is hooked up, it'll give you a reading of how many volts you're running. I'm going to put these, I'm probably going to build some sort of box that I'm going to mount on the floor up in the iCamper tent. So I'll have one on one side for my phone and one on the other side for my wife. and or maybe, you know, one for LED lights, who knows, but that's what these are for. They're going to go up inside the tent. And lastly, I got this here. This is a really neat grommet. It's made by a company called Fastronics. That's the part number there. Weatherproof Grommet. So what happens is you would figure out where you want to punch your harness through the tub, and you're going to drill a hole in this diameter. You slide the grommet through the sheet metal, and from the inside you're going to crank this nut down and snug it up to your sheet metal being in between that gap there. And then you run your wires through, your wire loom through your harness. And how it works is, you see this rubber gasket inside here, and it's got these teeth, these flexible teeth, kind of like the zoom lens on an old school camera. And if you look at this lid, it's got this chamfered lip on it, and it's also threaded. And so as you got your wires through here, your wire loom through here, and as you tighten this down, this nut down, it presses in on those teeth, and the teeth press in on that rubber seal. This is going to go back here where the wire harness passes through this wall into the battery bank. So this is the final design for the battery bank tray that I handed in the other day. I did make a few little tweaks based on a video that I found on YouTube called how to design parts for CNC machining. If you're going to design for CNC machining, I would definitely go and watch that video. I'll put a link to it down in the description for this video. Maybe a little bubble up here, the thumbnail for that video. There's a lot of helpful information on how to save money and time. What kind of stuff is going to break router bits, and just all that kind of stuff, techniques, and yeah, definitely go and check that out. One of the more important things that I learned from that video is that if you're able to do all of your feature work on one side and not have to flip the piece over and reposition it, that's going to save the machine shop a lot of time, and in turn it's going to save you a lot of money. So the way this is designed now, I have, as I mentioned earlier, this rear section, this rear flap bends up, and this front one will bend up once I get the plate back. And so I have my relief cuts, but in the rear, on the rear tab, this is the shunt platform part of that tab, which is going to have to bend in the opposite direction. And originally I had a similar relief cut on the back side of this tab, and that would mean that the machine shop, after they machined all the features in this side of the plate, they would have to then flip the piece over and reposition it just right, just to machine that relief cut on the opposite side. And it's really not that necessary, being that this is only 5mm steel plate. I can easily just heat that up and bend it over in my vise. So I might not even need to heat it up. We'll see when I get it back. But little things like that are going to save you a lot of time and money. But so, as I said, this one, like the others, has these two relief cuts. I've added these openings here, these 4 openings. These are for the battery hold down straps. So when the final tray is all bent up and into place, these openings will be here. There'll be one here, and 2 in the back. And so what's going to happen is I'm using this nylon strap. These are nice thick straps, and those will hold the batteries down inside the tray. Like the other versions, this one also has the perforated base plate. That's just to reduce the surface contact with the battery. because I want to keep the battery, the temperatures down. And now that I have my harness sort of isolated and gathered together, my game plan is to run it down. Can't really see from this angle, but there's an opening. If you look behind your starter battery tray, there's an opening that goes down and out the bottom of the Jeep. So I'm gonna run that wire down behind this panel, and I've made a hole here into my torque box with another rubber grommet. So that harness is gonna come down into this grommet, and it's gonna travel. This is just a chaser wire that I'm using to pull the harness through. But it's gonna follow inside the torque box here, all the way back to the end of the torque box back here. And then it's gonna cut across the belly pan. And I'm gonna use one of those eyelets that I got to fasten it to the, probably this nut here. And then it's gonna wrap around the corner and come up into the tub through this wall right here with my Fastronics grommet. Okay, I had to stop and film this because this kind of stuff never happens. I just fished that entire harness through this grommet all the way through the torque box and out the back in less than a few minutes. Unbelievable. What I had to do was bring the RCA jacks through the grommet first, because they're really wide. And then I just sort of dangled them down through this hole. And then I poked the harness in and drug the harness through the grommet into the torque box. And as the harness traveled through the torque boxes, it pulled the RCA jacks up behind it and through the box and all the way to the back. I've never fished a harness through anything that quick with that little trouble. Unbelievable. All right, X marks the spot. So we're going back now. There it is. Whenever something goes really well, it's always followed by something that jacks you up. This location right here is where I pretty much have to come through my wall with my wiring harness. Now, if you look closer, you can see there's something behind there, right? So that hole needs to be in that exact spot because of the design of my tray. So my wiring harness comes out of my torque box here, then comes across the tub, and I used one of those holes that I regretted drilling last week. Thankfully, I was able to use one of them. I'm going to use the other one to hold the tray down. So my harness comes across the belly here, and then it's got to turn this edge here and go into that hole. Now that clearance right there, I can make that clearance if I come up higher and then go in. I can make that clearance with the harness, but the Fastronics grommet is no way going to fit in between that wall and that exhaust hanger right there. That's a bummer. I suppose I can use it for something else in the Jeep, but for this project, I'm not going to be able to use this one. It's just way too big. I'm going to have to go with the same style grommet that I went into the torque box with. this one right here. It's a nice tight fit, so it should be pretty water resistant, waterproof with a little bit of RTV. But that's where I'm at. No Fastronics. Oh well. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up here. It's been a pretty successful day. I managed to get my my subwoofer harness rerouted from along the other side of the transmission tunnel there. I got it out, got it rerouted across the firewall behind the dashboard, back out here, and joined it into my isolator harness nice and clean. And so all my wires are all together to the back of the Jeep, going through the channel here and then across the belly. There's one thing that I am gonna adjust is these power lines they're fine. I got plenty of length in those. I might even wind up clipping most of those back. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think these RCAs are a little bit short. So what I'm gonna do is pull the slack from the front. Originally, I was gonna mount the isolator on top of the battery. I was gonna build a custom bracket, mount it on top of the battery. But being that it's basically a solid state unit, there's no dials or adjustments or anything that need to be made. I can kind of just mount this and forget about it. So what I'm gonna do is mount it, instead of up here, I'm gonna mount it all the way down here in the back behind the battery on the firewall. And if I do that, I'll be able to pull another probably 8 to 10 inches of slack out of my wiring harness if I'm mounting the isolator down here. So I'm gonna mount some nutserts, probably one up here and one diagonally over here. Luckily my nutsert tool is just small enough that I can fit that in there. All right, so I just got back from my favorite hardware store, and it looks like M5 is the perfect size hardware for the isolator, to mount the isolator to the firewall. I had M6 in my head for some reason, but that turned out to be a little bit too big. So luckily I grabbed M6, M5, and M4 just to be safe. Also, when I was at the hardware store, let me preface this by saying I know I'm completely out of my mind, but I was walking around the back of the hardware store and I realized I had these giant spools of shrink tubing. And I found shrink tubing wide enough in diameter to fit my wiring harness. So one of the things that bothered me about the loom that I used, this loom here, is that when I pulled it out of the box, it just feels a little bit squishy and flimsy. I guess it's the material thickness. And another problem is that because I'm not able to use the Fast Tracks grommet, which would have been perfect for this size loom, since I'm stuck having to use these rubber grommets, the center hole for these is way too small for this loom. So if I were to redo my harness and just shrink tube the entire length, I could fit it easily through the grommet down here and the grommet up in the front, in front of my torque, that's going into my torque boxes. And I probably would be able to slide this through my torque boxes with even greater ease than I did with it just sporadically duct taped. Another thing that bothered me is that because that other loom is so big and I couldn't fit it through the grommet in the front, there's a stretch of harness from about here running inside the torque boxes all the way back to, so you can see up here, it starts here again. I was able to slide the loom back maybe 6 inches or so, but that whole stretch inside the torque box has no loom. It's just duct taped wires, which kind of bugs me because if you look under here, there are bolts that hold the boot side on. And so I can imagine that if those wires are just in there bare, just duct taped together, there's a better chance that they're going to be rubbing on the screws that are holding the boat side on. So I really don't like that. So I think, being that it only took me a few minutes to run the harness through the torque boxes, through that whole channel, it only took me a few minutes yesterday to do it. I'm going to go ahead and drag the whole thing out again, and I'm going to shrink tube it and then run it back through the channel again. And that way I'll be able to put a little bearing grease on this, and it'll slide straight through these grommets, and the harness will be protected. The full length of the harness will be protected, unlike just the beginning of it and the end of it with this flimsy Chinese-made loom. All right, so I just got the isolator mounted. Got to tighten down the screws, but that's where it's going to live. And I got my wires situated. I went ahead and shrink wrapped the whole harness. Much better than that crappy, cheap Chinese-made loom that I bought. This is nice and tight. But I got the whole thing shrink wrapped all the way up to behind the battery box. So next, it's going to go back into my grommet here, through the torque box, all the way back into the second grommet that goes through the wall back into the battery bank. All right, so it's back in. I couldn't have gone any easier, to be honest. I put a little bit of dish detergent on the outside of the harness, on the shrink tubing, and it slid through both grommets like nothing. I got about 3 times the length of RCA cord now, which is probably more than enough. I got so much more accessory line that I can actually cut the extension off that I made. I previously made that extension because I didn't think it was going to be long enough. I got my isolators permanently wired and mounted. I decided to ditch the fuse box that I had on the bench seat. I think I showed it earlier. It was the problem I was having is it was sliding around on the floor and banging into things, and it was really awkward. So I got rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that, and I installed this 30 amp breaker on the firewall. So now the power line for the amps comes off the battery into that breaker, and then it goes to the back and comes in through there. This is what I had earlier when I had the whole harness sort of just hanging out across the floor inside the Jeep, and this thing is just really awkward, and so that's going to go away, and I'll just have a single power line, or maybe actually I can probably mount this inside down here somewhere, and then leave this as is, and then have one single power line come out of here and meet up with the power line that I just brought in. All right, so now that the harness is in and it's all set up on the battery side, I'm just doing some cleanup work. I have a lot of bad wiring jobs over the years done by me and the previous owner, so I'm just cleaning that kind of stuff up. One thing that bothered me for a while is my winch line, or my winch power lines. When I bought the winch, I had it installed for me from the shop. Not because I was lazy, I just wasn't really comfortable and familiar with this kind of stuff at that point. So they, in an effort to get stuff done and out the door, they put the winch on and just ran the lines in. Bolted them to the battery, and then instead of cutting the lines to my specific needs in terms of length, they just kind of wound them up behind this panel next to the battery. So every time I pull the battery out, the lines would just kind of collapse into the tray, and it's just a mess, and I'd have to hold the lines back up to put the battery back in. So that's it's just not really that professional. So I wound up cutting the winch lines. I cut a good 20 inches off of both the hot and the ground. So it's nice and clean now. These are the exact length that I need to the battery terminals. Once I get this stuff cleaned up, I'm gonna add a fuse to these lines and get this stuff all reattached. I'm in good shape. I'm ready to drop the battery back in. At this point, really, once I finish this stuff, all I'm waiting on is the tray to come back for the battery bank. Doing a good job?